If you're trying to drag your fantasy party into a cyberpunk setting without it feeling weird as hell, here's the mindset shift that you're gonna need as a DM. This isn't a rules video because I'm assuming you can already run the game your table is picked for you, whether that's Carbon 2185, Savage Worlds, Cyberpunk RED, Shadowrunners, or one of the many other out there. This is about how to make Cyberpunk actually feel right at the table. Because Cyberpunk isn't just fantasy with guns and neon signs. So get out your pen and paper because this is going to be a longer one. It's pressure, survival, identity, and consequences. If your Cyberpunk campaign just feels like D&D wearing a leather jacket, then you're probably running the wrong fantasy. Not really. Cyberpunk is about pressure. Pressure from debts, pressure from corporations, from the city, and from survival itself. Think less heroic fantasy adventure and more Blade Runner 2049, RoboCop, or the game Nobody Wants to Die. Worlds where corporations own everything. The city feels exhausting, and survival itself has become monetized. In fantasy, players usually chase adventure, and in Cyberpunk, you chase survival. And that's the difference that changes everything about how you'll run the world itself. You also don't want to overload players with information immediately. One of the fastest ways to lose a group in Cyberpunk is dropping 30 minutes of lore before they've even emotionally entered the setting. Let them live in the world first. Let them eat at the street vendors, get hustled in an alley, watch a drone chase somebody across traffic. Let them plant their own feet in the city before you dump the entire economic collapse timeline. Because if all players hear early on is corruption, poverty, death, corporations, and suffering, the setting can start to feel emotionally exhausting instead of immersive, and Cyberpunk needs contrast. You need moments of humor, moments of humanity, stupid downtime. The crew arguing over noodles at 2 a.m. while somebody's cyberarm won't stop vibrating. Honestly, every Cyberpunk campaign needs at least one idiot NPC that somehow survives his way longer than they should. And if things start getting too emotionally heavy, run a lighter session occasionally. Seriously. Think of Cyberpunk like Ravenloft or Curse of Strahd. If the pressure never releases, the players eventually stop emotionally reacting to it. And you're gonna need those moments of light for the darkness to actually hit. So now let's get into the rest of the stuff I've learned. Economic divide. The economic divide in Cyberpunk should feel absolutely brutal. Not subtle and not just background flavor. It should be constant. When things are bad, they're horrific. When things are fine, they're still expletive. And when things look perfect, that usually means somebody suffered to maintain that. And in Cyberpunk, wealth and suffering exist on top of one another. Players walk through a luxury district where people will spend more money on synthetic wine than their entire family makes in a year, while a homeless veteran sleeps beside a holographic advertisement for military implants. An executive gets delivered fresh imported sushi by drone, while 2 streets over somebody dies while they couldn't afford insulin. That contrast is the genre. The city should feel unequal. Cyberpunk cities should constantly remind players this world was not built equally. One block has gold-plated skyscrapers with indoor waterfalls, while the next block smells like hot wiring and sewage. In Cyberpunk, comfort is usually something purchased using somebody else's suffering. And the really important part, most people in this setting treat that as normal. That's what makes Cyberpunk unsettling. It's not just the violence, but the normalization of it. People step over bodies because they're already late for work. Advertisements play over emergency broadcasts. Corporations market luxury cyberware directly beside poverty camps. Consequences should linger. The world should react to players' actions almost constantly. Good cyberpunk worlds should feel closer to crime dramas than a heroic fantasy. Actions will create a ripple effect, and that will cascade. Think about Breaking Bad, the smaller decision that slowly spiraled into the bigger consequences. Corporations will retaliate. Corporations should not feel passive. If players damage corporate property or steal data or embarrass the wrong exec, then that creates fallout. Not instantly every time, but eventually something bubbles up. Gangs will remember. Street organizations survive through reputation and retaliation, and if the players start to cause chaos in a district, the people are gonna remember. Districts should change. The city itself should evolve. If players ignore a gang war for 3 sessions, maybe that neighborhood belongs to someone else now. The graffiti's different, and the security changes, and people start to disappear. The world moving without the players makes the setting actually start to feel alive. People disappear. Cyberpunk worlds should sometimes feel quietly terrifying. Someone misses payments and they're just gone. Corporate whistleblower came out a week ago, gone. A fixer that talked too much, gone. And the scary part is most people in the city just keep walking. That should feel constant. Not just the you owe money, but I mean the ever-present pressure sitting behind the background of the campaign. You might miss your rent. Now your landlord's going to sell information about your apartment to the local gang. You missed payments on your cyberware. Well, congrats. Now your nervous system subscription just expired. Cyberpunk debt should feel less like fantasy gold tracking, more like getting an email from your insurance company saying, unfortunately, your lungs are no longer covered. Corporations should feel almost omnipresent. Good cyberpunk corporations shouldn't feel cartoonishly evil. They should feel believable. Like if Amazon, a healthcare company, and a private military contractor fused into one entity. Your players should see corporate logos more often than human kindness. Every vending machine, every drone, advertisement, subway station is owned by somebody. Most people in the setting are too exhausted to even question it. Gangs control the streets corporations stop pretending to care about, and they'll do anything. You walk through the wrong alley, get jumped by 6 goons. Want protection? That's going to be a tax. Parking your car somewhere? You got it stolen. Breathing too confidently in someone else's neighborhood? Also another tax. Think less fantasy bandits and more local governments with guns. Something closer to gangs of New York or factions from Judge Dredd. Cyberpunk gangs should operate like an HOA board with assault rifles. Survival. This is the core mindset you need as a DM. Every system, every encounter, every job, and district should somehow reinforce survival. Cyberpunk works when players feel they're one bad week away from a full collapse. In fantasy, failure usually means delayed heroism. In Cyberpunk, failure can cost your house, healthcare, your identity, or even parts of your body. Favors should function almost like currency, because in a world where institutions fail, relationships become infrastructure. Maybe the party can't afford military hardware, but they know a guy who knows a guy who definitely shouldn't be trusted. The city is your character. This is probably the biggest adjustment for fantasy DMs. And fantasy cities are usually just a location, a backdrop. In Cyberpunk, the city is the experience. Cyberpunk cities should feel like Blade Runner, Akira, Ghost in a Shell. They should be overcrowded, noisy, overstimulating, and emotionally isolating. Advertisements should be everywhere, and I mean everywhere. You shouldn't be able to blink without a corporation trying to sell you something. Crowds should sometimes feel claustrophobic. Corporate wars destroyed huge parts of rural life, so people flood to the megacities looking for work, safety, and normalcy. And even then, most of them still barely survive. Small cities in cyberpunk settings can still have a population pulling upwards of 30 million. The city should constantly feel overfilled. Like humanity expanded faster than infrastructure ever could. Like someone tried to stack New York, Tokyo, and a refugee crisis on top of one another. Describe the cities like they are exhausting to live inside. The constant hum of neon, advertisements screaming overhead, sirens in the distance, industrial fans rattling somewhere above the street, and the smells. Oil, smoke, hot electronics, rainwater, street food, sewage. A good cyberpunk city should externally feel like sensory overload. Drones should feel completely normal. One drone delivers groceries, while 2 blocks over, one's mounted with military hardware, and nobody reacts to either. Look, it's Cyberpunk. If your city doesn't glow like somebody weaponized a rave, you're legally obligated to fix that. Surveillance should feel constant, even when players think they disabled it. They might have shut down the main security terminal, but there's somebody still watching through the traffic cans, the consumer electronics, or remote systems. In Cyberpunk, privacy is usually just an illusion sold to rich people. Combat should feel dangerous. This is another place where fantasy DMs usually struggle transitioning into Cyberpunk. Because if combat starts to feel like superheroes trading hit points, you lose that tone fast. In Cyberpunk, violence should feel fast, messy, dangerous, and expensive. You want combat to feel less like the Avengers and more like the hallway fights in Sicario or the street violence in Heat. Players shouldn't casually sprint through automatic gunfire like they're late for initiative. When the bullets start flying, people should panic. Even experienced characters should understand that one bad fight can ruin your entire month. The moment players realize combat is actually dangerous, their decision making changes completely. They'll stop asking, can we actually fight this? And they'll start asking, should we even be here? Cover should matter constantly. The moment bullets enter a campaign, D&D players suddenly rediscover the concept of walls. And it turns out standing in the open becomes significantly less appealing when the enemy has an assault rifle. Suppressive fire is also huge for atmosphere. Even if enemies aren't landing shots, forcing players into bad positions creates panic. Gunfights will always become way more tense when positioning matters more than hit points. Injuries should linger. Not necessarily in a miserable realism simulator way, but like enough that violence leaves scars. Cyberpunk combat becomes memorable when players feel the aftermath. This is another thing that I would say Carbon 2185 handles surprisingly well. Newer groups is firearms immediately change encounter pacing. The augments can drastically alter how players fight, and tactical position suddenly matters a little more than fantasy groups expect. And one of the biggest differences between fantasy and cyberpunk is information becomes valuable enough to kill over. In fantasy, players will steal gold. Cyberpunk, you're going to steal leverage. You need blackmail, encrypted research, gang records, corporate leaks, surveillance footage, prototypes, and schematics. In Cyberpunk, there are entire economies built around secret. People will sell those identities, those passwords, and the footage. In Cyberpunk, information is often worth more than the firepower. Hacking should feel powerful. Hacking isn't just to open doors, it's control. Shutting down lights, hijacking drones, manipulating records, ruining reputations, destroying lives. The scariest cyberpunk characters aren't always the ones holding guns, sometimes they're the ones holding data. Style isn't just extra flavor, it's part of survival. Your identity matters. Cyberpunk worlds are heavily identity. You need fashion augments aesthetic, tattoos, slang rep, crew colors. People should feel recognizable. In Cyberpunk, how people perceive you can matter just as much as what you actually do. Reputation spreads fast in dense urban environments. Maybe your crew is known for their brutality, maybe it's their professional. Maybe they're just relatable. Maybe they just cause too much collateral damage and nobody likes them. That reputation should follow them. Cyberpunk characters survive entirely through nicotine, bad decisions, and unmatched drip. Style matters because it helps players emotionally inhabit the fantasy. Players usually connect to Cyberpunk the moment they stop thinking mechanically and start thinking aesthetically. A cyberpunk world should react like it's alive. Cyberpunk works when players feel pressure from the world itself, and that's when the genre finally clicks. The best cyberpunk stories usually aren't about saving the world, they're about surviving in the system too big to fight alone. Whether it's Blade Runner 2049, Ghost in a Shell, or 2077, the genre works when players feel pressure from the world itself.